Welcome to the 2022 display at the Decorative Arts Center of Ohio, which is a Storybook Christmas featuring a Very Brady Holiday. I'm Dr. George Johnson, one of the co-curators of this year's display. This is the entrance to this year's display, and we have a costume that was worn by an actress during the Very Brady Bunch movie. And we'll see more of these costumes as we proceed through the displays. This is the rear parlor of the display, and we have a 1965 time period here with an aluminum tree. This is the time period that I call the prequel to the Brady Bunch series. In 65, Mike Brady would have been a widower, and Carol would have been a widow, yet all the children were alive. And this was the tree that both households would have had, this large aluminum tree. And these presents underneath are for both the boys and the girls, and they would have been the types of toys that you would have seen under a tree in 64, 65, and 66. Behind me is a mantle with Christmas cards from the 1960s on it, and stockings from the same time period for each of the children and for the mother and the father. So as we slide over here, we also see that in 1965, the animated movie of Charlie Brown Christmas came out, and it's directly related to this tree because that particular animated series, which was written by Charles Schulz, the originator of the Peanuts characters, he was very upset with the commercialization of Christmas, and he wanted to show that the real meaning of Christmas had to do with the birth of Christ. So he has the character of Lucy commenting about the tree that they want for the Christmas program, the school Christmas program, to be a shiny aluminum tree with pink decorations. So we have that back here. But Charlie Brown wants to go back to the original meaning of Christmas and our natural tree, and he and Linus go out, and we see in this image right here from the storybook that they pick this Charlie Brown tree. And from there, we go forward with the meaning of Christmas and joy and things, and not the over-commercialization. And so, ultimately, this TV special is given credit for changing the American view of Christmas. And we begin to see the death of the aluminum tree and a return of what we see over on the piano of the original true meaning of Christmas. So here we have the religious elements that come forth at that period of time. Again, most of these pieces are antique, though, and predate that series, obviously. We have a triptych, which probably came from a small home altar during the 1800s, and it shows the birth of Christ and the heralding angels. From the 1890s, we have a series of puzzles that illustrate the birth of Christ and his life. We have a 5-stage pyramid. Christmas pyramids were popular in the 1800s into the 1930s in Germany and have become popular in the United States starting about the 1970s, 1980s. But we have figures that demonstrate this is the arrival of the Joseph and Mary in Bethlehem. We have Roman soldiers and Joseph and Mary. And then we have the arrival of the 3 wise men. We have the traditional nativity scene here and shepherds in the other stages. Candles would be lit, and the heat from the candles rising would turn the heat vane at the top, and the piece would turn about that speed, allowing a full view of the story of Christmas. Then we have several Christmas books, a little golden book, and one from the 1800s. Over on this table, we have a couple children's books that started out and as illustrated children's books and later became movies. We have the Polar Express, and this is the Santa from the Polar Express, which was a placard that would have been found in the theaters when it came out in the theater lobbies. We have a copy of the book, which was a Caldecott award-winning book, the Polar Express. Some various trains, information placards around a lot of these that tell information about the storybook, when it was written, how it was turned into a movie, and some interesting, did you know facts about each of those. We also have a little bell that visitors can ring to see if they still believe in Christmas. Right next to that is the book by Dr. Seuss, How the Grinch Stole Christmas. This is the 65th anniversary of that book. On display back here is an original 1957 first edition of the book. A later edition is opened to one of the pages, illustrated pages in the book. Interestingly, one of those did you know facts that we talk about on some of the placards is that the Grinch has no color in the original books. It wasn't until the movie, the animated movie came out, that the Grinch turned green. We also have two glass ornaments, a blow mold light up from 2021 of the Grinch. And this is a commemorative doll from this year, the 65th anniversary of the Grinch. On the couch in the rear parlor, we have a small collection of pop-up books that were very popular during the 1950s, which was during my childhood. These were put out by different publishing companies, but they all had, regardless of the company, were very similar in nature. They had a decorative box that the pop-up book came in, and when you opened it up, you had the book inside, almost always on a spiral bound binding. And then as the child opened the book and went through it, images popped up. Sometimes there were little toys on the inside, little gifts. It was a simple enough story. There were literally dozens and dozens of these types of books that were sold in that time period from about 1950 to about 1959. So this is the iconic horse from the Brady Bunch TV series and the movies. And it's what kind of ushers us into the front parlor. And we'll be leaving then the 1950s and the 1960s, and we'll be moving into those 1970 years of the TV series. We believe that this is the original horse that was seen throughout the series and throughout the movies. It was broken somewhere along the line and repaired in the Very Brady renovation. So it's a nice piece to kind of bring us forward into the Brady Bunch. Okay, flanking the door as you come into the front parlor are two costumes from the movies, a Very Brady sequel, which was movies that came after the TV series. These weren't worn by the original actors. They were worn by a different actor and actress for the movies. But this was one that was for Mike Brady. You got a nice mod shirt and dark blue navy pants, bell bottoms at the bottom. This one was an outfit that was worn by the character Carol Brady, a nice powder blue and oranges and golds. And these were popular colors, and they were for the time period of the shows. Here we have two costumes that were worn by the children actors, again, not from the original TV series, but from the movie, a Very Brady sequel in both cases. And this one was part of the movie where they spent time in Hawaii. So we have two olive green suitcases down here that kind of depict that idea of traveling to Hawaii. And the olive greens and the oranges and the browns and the golds that you see throughout this particular room were very reminiscent of that color scheme that was used in the late 60s and into the middle of the 70s. So this is a display of, first of all, a couch when we've got it covered with afghans that were knitted in the colors and during the time period of the 1970s. Two of the afghans on here were knitted by my grandmother during this time period. Again, we see that reflection of the same type of color scheme that we'll find in the costumes. On the couch are two magazines. This one and the other one are both Better Homes and Gardens. These show how the trees were decorated in the late 60s and into the 70s. These are both magazines from that time period. At the end of the couch, we have a display of gift catalogs from the 1970s, so visitors could look through those and see what was popular as gifts at Christmas time. At the center of the couch is a Newsweek magazine, and it talks about nostalgia, how we have moved from those aluminum trees and that slick, really modern era back toward a more nostalgic Christmas, which we're going to see in the decorated trees of the Brady Bunch in this year. And it kind of brings full circle that idea we started in the back room with the Charlie Brown Christmas special, changing the format, the theme, and the traditions of the American Christmas, and coming full circle here to that return to a more nostalgic Christmas, which we see in the imagery in the books. Also, behind the couch, we have a collection of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer memorabilia and Frosty the Snowman. Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer started as a giveaway for Montgomery Ward in 1948 and was written by Robert May. It became very popularized by this record by Gene Autry, who was a popular singing cowboy at the time, and sang the song about Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. In the back we have a large coloring book, a giant story coloring book of Rudolph that matches up with the time period of the TV series of the Brady Bunch. And a blow mold in the back of Rudolph. And over on this side, we have Frosty the Snowman. Interesting enough, Rudolph started off as a giveaway, as I said, to the Montgomery Ward, and they gave away 2.5 million copies in that first Christmas that they were giving away. And the record itself went on to sell over 2 million copies. So for 1949 and 1950, there was this, well, if Rudolph was such a big hit, I wonder if we can make a hit with another record. And so Frosty really was invented as a record to try and make money, not as a storybook. And so, interestingly enough, in 1950, multiple people all sang the Frosty the Snowman, and we have an original sheet music for Frosty. And some of the records back there, and then some images of Frosty, 1950s plastic snowman with a bubble light, a Frosty with a Merry Christmas sign, a large candy container, and another light-up snowman in the back. One of the interesting pieces that came out in this time period also during the 1950s is this battery-operated snowman. His eyes light up, his head turns, he moves the room back and forth. But he also has a snowball that balances out of the air that's blown out his head. Okay, this is the mantle in the front parlor, which is set up to reflect the 1970s type of Christmas. We have 1970s Christmas cards across the top. And they come up with a very distinct style, again, using the same type of lettering and the same type of colors that we find in the clothing and the introduction to the Brady Bunch TV series. Underneath, again, we have some knitted stockings that reflect the Afghans that we had on the table, as well as some, colors that reflect the 1970s. A wreath underneath that was done in a quilt style that was done by my wife in the 1970s. And we have two Santas up here, and the one that's over there is a copy of the Santa that we'll find on the copy of the Christmas album that was done by the Brady Bunch kids and released in 1970. The costume over here is from the movie, a Very Brady sequel, and it was a costume that was worn by the character Jan Brady. On the couch, we have three costumes from the Brady Bunch movie, the Brady Bunch sequel, and the Brady Bunch movie again. This one was worn by the character Greg, this one by the character Peter, and that one by the character Marcia. Interestingly enough, in the TV series that started in 1969, there's only one Christmas special, and that was the 69 version called, or the episode was actually called The Voice of Christmas. And in that episode, the Brady Bunch children put a Christmas tree up, and this is a copy of that tree, the way that it was set up for that particular episode. It's a very simplistic tree, and it's not necessarily indicative of how Americans really decorated their trees at that time period. You've got to remember that these were props for a TV series, and as such were probably put together by pieces that the staff brought in. And so, but this does is a faithful reproduction of that tree. There's a scene where Carol Brady is taking special care to put that treetop on the tree at the top, and the toys that are underneath this tree and the next one that we'll be seeing are items that came from this time period of 69 through 74. Underneath this tree, there's a couple of items that relate directly to the Christmas special. The episode was called The Voice of Christmas, and the premise of that is that Carol Brady has to sing a solo at church on Christmas Eve, and she gets laryngitis and loses her voice. And Mike has bought as a Christmas present for her this tape recorder so that she could practice her song for the program. The blender that we see under this tree is an avocado green and orange again. It's like the one that we see in the back counter of the kitchen at the Brady house through the entire season, and it never seems to move. It's always in the same spot. On the table over here in the center, we find, again, some of the gifts and actually some of the props that were used. The Sherlock Holmes hat and the sleuthing tips were actual props in a Very Brady sequel movie. The peace poster was seen in Greg's room during a Very Brady sequel. And the Magic 8 Ball that we have over here was also a prop that was in the Very Brady sequel movie. And the shirt in here was worn by Gary Coleman, portraying Mike Brady in the Very Brady Bunch movie. The doll in the back is Kitty Carryall. She's an iconic doll from the series. She was the doll that belonged to the youngest Brady girl, Cindy, and we find her in actually many episodes, and one of the episodes is actually named after Kitty Carryall. She was a commercially made doll by Ideal Toys in 1968-69, and they never actually mention her maker. None of the toys that we see on display here were shown underneath the trees. Gifts were always wrapped in the TV series, and so we don't see any kind of what we might call merchandising or placement. Everything was always wrapped. After the fact, we saw some pieces, and the only one that's ever really talked about is the Kitty Carry-On doll. The next tree that we have is a 1970s tree. There's only 2 images of trees throughout the Brady Bunch series, TV series. And this is one that we find on a Very Brady Christmas album. And this tree that we see here is a copy of the one that we find on the album. It's decorated again in a 1970s style, but maybe a little bit more sparsely than what we might find in American homes at the time. Underneath the tree, again, we find more gifts that would have been things from that 1969 to 1974 time period of the TV series. Of note underneath, there are 2 cameras underneath here. In real life, the man that played Mike Brady, Robert Reed, bought for all the child actors this 9mm camera by Kodak, so that they could record their experience behind the scenes as they were doing the TV series and as they were on the road. Later in life, all that film was to be put together, spliced, edited out, and they put it out as the Brady home movies. The larger camera is one that Robert Reed used himself to also record the children and the behind the scenes and the activities of making the film. So I've placed them under the tree. Up on the buffet is some memorabilia type items. As I mentioned, we have the Merry Christmas from the Brady Bunch, the album that was put out in 1970, and that image is a recreation that the tree recreates. We have dolls, one from of Greg and one of Marcia, and the iconic image of the tic-tac-toe board of the family looking at each other has been used to create this Brady Bunch party game that came out much later than the TV series itself. And there's a TV guide in there that's dated 1975. 1975 is when the reruns of the Brady Bunch began. Okay, also we have an outfit that was from the Brady Bunch movie. It was worn by the character Jan. It's a macrame. Again, we come back to that avocado green. And underneath we have 3 gifts for those of the aficionados of the Brady Bunch series and the movies. As the series went on, there became a rivalry between Jan and Marcia. And in one of the famous scenes, it's, Jan says, "Marcia, Marcia, Marcia, always Marcia, never Jan." So underneath we have 3 larger gifts all labeled Marcia, 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 and a very small one labeled Jan. So here we have 3 costumes. Well, the farthest one was one that would have been worn by the character Marcia Brady in the Brady Bunch movie. This one would have been worn by the character Greg in the Brady Bunch movie. And this one is from the Very Brady sequel. And again, it would have been worn by the character Marcia. And underneath, we have a poster of Davy Jones. The Monkees were a popular singing group at the time, and the Brady girls all kind of had a crush on Davy Jones and had a Davy Jones fan club. He actually showed up in one of the episodes. In the 1960 episode that showed the Christmas tree, we find Carol Brady sitting behind a table wrapping presents. And so this is reminiscent of that particular scene with gift wrap from the late 60s, early 70s, ribbons, room decorations that haven't been put out yet. And this is a costume that actually was worn by Florence Henderson as Carol Brady It's the only outfit costume in the display that was actually from the TV series. This is the hallway at the Decorative Arts Center. This is a collection of the Night Before Christmas books. They all have a little tag that gives you a date so that you can look at them when you visit. The earliest one is from the 1840s, and the latest one is from the 1980s. And we have also here some glass ornaments that run from the 1930s up to about 2015 that are representative of Santa and the Night Before Christmas. Across from the Night Before Christmas books, we have a few more pop-up books that, again, are from the 1950s. This one is called Visions of St. Nicholas in Action, and it's actually a panoramic three-dimensional pop-up book that shows Santa Claus making toys and delivering toys, things like that. And then this one is the Jolly Snowman, which probably was a knockoff of Frosty the Snowman. But again, a pop-up book from the 1950s. On the couch in the hallway, we have a larger collection of these 1950s pop-up books, which is one of the features of our Storybook Christmas. These all were put out during the Christmas seasons from 1950s up to about 1959, and then began to die away in the early 60s. Some of these show a wide range of what they did. This particular one, for example, opens up in the back, and it actually has a toy xylophone in it that plays, along with a music book that the children can follow the instructions and play the tunes. A lot of them had images like this that when you turn the page would open up. Others had images that would slide or hide, wheels that would turn, and this one has a clown that jumps up from the page, and the clown is holding a balloon that the child could pull away from there and blow up and play with. A lot of times they had, you can see as you turn the page here, the sword comes up and out of the sword swallower's mouth. Just a very creative work that was done by the paper engineers. On the hallway buffet, we have a collection of children's books about Christmas. They range in age from the 1800s up until 1950s, 1960s. We also have a range of records that were all Christmas in nature. A good example of one of the records is I Saw Mommy Kissing Santa Claus. And today most people are probably familiar with the Michael Jackson version of it, but this is the original version by Jimmy Boyd, who was only 12 years old at the time that he made the record. We have some snow globes up at the top, and these books, instead of just telling the story of the night before Christmas, they have whole collections of Christmas stories, some of them fairy tales and things like that, but most of them are also illustrated books about the Christmas time of year. So as you enter into the rising room, the first display that we have is A Christmas Carol, story by Charles Dickens. We have a copy of the book over there. And most of the displays have a guide, a piece of information for the visitors. It tells about how the book was written, why it was written, and a lot of information, I think cute little did you know type of facts that go with it. For example, with this particular story, did you know that Charles Dickens was highly influenced by the fact that his father was in pauper's prison, debtor's prison, and he had to quit school and go to work in a factory at a very young age. And so firsthand he understood the inequities of Victorian England towards debtors. And of course, that is how he's writing about, what he's writing about in The Christmas Carol, turning Scrooge from that old man, as he was saying, bah humbug, people are in debtor's prison, so what, to, that gracious old man. So it's a sign of the times, but it's also part of his own heritage. Also, we have a tree that's decorated with glass ornaments that portray the characters and the story from The Christmas Carol. We have the ghosts of Christmas past and future, and two interesting pieces that I find is we have a double-sided piece of Scrooge. On one side, he's the grumpy old man, bah humbug. On the other side, he's the character that's bringing gifts to the Cratchit family. And the same thing with this particular piece. It's a topsy-turvy, and we've got a nice smiling Scrooge, a sprig of holly on his hat, and you turn him upside down, and we find the old grumpy Scrooge. We have a nice, large, lit-up leg lamp here, so it can only be from one place, and that's A Christmas Story. The Christmas story is often told or seen on TV, throughout the Christmas season, and we still have, 24 hours of it being broadcast on Turner Broadcast. So it's probably one of the most popular of the Christmas movies at this point in time. And we have several items then that are from the the main elements of the story. Of course, the leg lamp stands out, which was a major prize for the old man. And interestingly enough, we never hear, Ralphie's father's first name. He's always referred to as the old man. We have the Oh Fudge scene, which starts off with a flat tire as they're coming home from the Christmas parade, and they have to change the flat tire. And the lug nuts are taken off, placed in the hubcap, and, the hubcap is bumped. The lug nuts go flying into the air amongst the slush and the snow and the ice at the side of the road. And Ralphie goes, "Oh, fudge." Of course, that's not what he says. And as he goes home, he has to have Lifebuoy stuck in his eye, or mouth washed out with soap. So this is Lifebuoy soap, which was what was used in the TV series. When decorating the tree, we find that the Parker household has at the top of their tree this metal star. And as we're seeing the back of the household, the dining room of the household, we find this 5 lamp chandelier with orange candles in the back of the room. This is an original 1940s decoder badge. This is what Ralphie is using to decode the secret message that he hears on the Little Orphan Annie radio program. Be sure to drink your Ovaltine. And this is the decoder badge from 1940 that he was waiting on for, months, it seemed to him at the time. And of course, we have the Red Ryder BB gun. That is, the plot pretty much for the whole story. This is the mantle in the rising room. Down below, we have 2 blow molds from the middle 2000s. We have Rudolph, and we have the abominable snow monster. These were characters that were not original to the story about Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, but they were original to the animated TV special. On top of the mantle, we have a tradition that has kind of been lost in America because it's a British tradition, and that's of the Christmas fairy, as opposed to Santa Claus bringing gifts. We have an early book simply called The Christmas Fairy, 2 glass ornaments of a Christmas fairy, and an ornament that's made out of cotton. Perhaps the most interesting of this particular series is this is the Night Before Christmas book, and we would expect all the ones that we've seen that Santa's on the front cover. In this particular one, which was published in England, we have the fairy, the Christmas fairy. even though it's the night before Christmas, bringing the gifts to the children. Next to that, we have an original theater placard from the animated Rudolph, the very first animated, which was a short shown in theaters, not the TV special. And then this is an original copy of the giveaway from the late 1940s, written by Robert May, that was given away in the Montgomery Ward stores. They gave away 2.5 million copies of that in one Christmas. Right next to that is a little elf, and we'll be talking about the little elves in a moment, but also is a Christmas card, probably from about 1917, that says that there's a Christmas dinner waiting for you in Lancaster, Ohio. So these two pieces don't really fit into the idea of Christmas storybooks, but they fit into Lancaster, Ohio, which is where we're at. The other one is a book of Christmas matches that was probably from the 1960s. It was a giveaway gift from Mager's Seafood Restaurant here in Lancaster, Ohio. At the very end of the mantelpiece are two books, Wizard of Oz books. The original, the first one is an original copy from the 1920s of the Emerald City of Oz. In the center is a glass ornament of Glinda, and on the far end is a reproduced copy of the very first Wizard of Oz book called The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. On the desk here in the Rising Room, we have some characters, the main characters from A Nightmare Before Christmas, which came out in the 1990s. This was made by Tim Burton and released through Walt Disney through Touchstone Studios. Again, it's kind of become a classic amongst the children who grew up in the 1990s watching this on TV. We've got a glass ornament of Jack Skellington. This is Oogie Boogie, this is Jack Skeleton, and this is the character Sally. At this end, in the back, we have the gingerbread man. Of course, gingerbread cookies and gingerbread men and women are really popular during Christmas time. This is a 1937 large illustrated book of the gingerbread boy. This is an earlier one from 1932. And we have some gingerbread people cutouts and a couple of ornaments, and this one is the gingerbread boy sinking into a cup of hot chocolate just before he's eaten. And then across the front are three more of the pop-up books. Sometimes people say, well, George, how did you get collecting, all of these things? And these three are how it all started. These are gifts that I was given during the 1950s at Christmas time by my grandparents. This one's Santa Visits Mother Goose. This one is a pop-up book of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, and this one's still inscribed, and it says, "To Georgie," from Grandma Johnson, December the 25th, 1957, age 8 years old. This is another one that's inscribed on the inside from my grandmother, Santa's A Merry Christmas. So, this nostalgia that these brought back to me as I reached adulthood was the catalyst for collecting many of the other pop-up books, activity books that you see in the collection. This large tree here in the Rising Room is our Storybook Tree. At first glance, you can see that we've got storybooks interspersed in with glass ornaments. The books are children's books. A lot of them are from the 1930s. Others are little golden books from the 1950s, 1970s, and even later. And then surrounding them are the ornaments then that they depict that have been turned into Christmas decorations. Right here beside me, we've got Goldilocks and the Three Bears. There's the book from the 1930s, and there are the decorations right through here. We've got a wide range of the Wizard of Oz ornaments. These books were too large to put on the tree, but we've got a wide variety of those. We have some Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. I see the Wicked Witch over here and the Evil Queen over there. So visitors, what we encourage the visitors to do is there is a a sheet over here that you can actually try and locate all the different types of pieces that are on the tree. Some of them are quite easy to see because they're large collections, just like the Wizard of Oz pieces that I mentioned. Some of them are a little harder because maybe they only have 4 or 5 ornaments up there. And then there are the really hard to find ones because there's maybe only one of them up there. For example, there's only one Harry Potter ornament up there. There's only one Little Boy Blue blowing his horn up there. There's only one Little Miss Muffet. So we encourage the visitors to come in and enjoy the tree and kind of look it over and find some favorite ornaments on there and maybe hunt for the hard ones to find. On the chair beside the large storybook tree, we have the elf on the shelf. This is kind of a more recent phenomena in terms of children's books and interest in Christmas stories. We have a 1950s doll that my wife Jeannie and I have dressed up as the elf on the shelf. The storybook comes as a kit, and in the kit you have some explanations, you have the storybook, and you have the elf on the shelf, which they call scout elves. The basic story is that these elves show up in your house somewhere from mid-November through Christmas time, and they are scouts for Santa Claus. Nightly, they fly back to the North Pole and they tell Santa Claus what's been happening in that household during the day, whether the children have been good or not. And then after the report, they fly back to the household, but they end up in a different place. So we encourage the visitors to look around because there's elves on the shelf in all sorts of different places throughout the whole display. As they, come back, they end up in different places. Interesting fact is that we have, this is a box for the elf on the shelf, and it says up in the corner, I'm a boy. So we have a boy elf. But they also made it for girls. And up in the corner it says, I'm a girl elf. So this is the girl elf. So that, we had one for both types of children. Interestingly enough, most of the elves that are on display and hidden throughout the room predate by many years this story. Collectors call them knee-hugger elves. They came out in the 1960s, and they were made in Japan, and they typically are in a squatting position like this with their arms around the knees. And much the same thing happened. They were placed on the tree, they were placed as room decorations, and children in the 1960s were encouraged to try and find all the elves in the house. On the sofa, we have a couple more pop-up books from the 50s that we've talked about before, but we also have a different storybook. This one is called The Christmas Doll. It was by Wendy Parker. And in brief, the story is about a girl who wants to go to the North Pole to visit Santa Claus and see how toys are made. So she mails herself. And when she arrives, Santa Claus has lost his glasses, and he thinks that she is just a toy doll that the elves have made. So most of the story is about Santa finding his glasses and then finding a way to get this girl home to her family. Wendy Parker is a local artist. She was an OU grad, and as of 1976, when the book was published and the bio was published, lived in German Village. So I have 2 copies, one here, which is open to the page that shows the little girl and how she's dressed. Again, Jeannie and I have dressed a 1950s doll in the same type of clothing. And this particular one in the protective binder here is an autographed copy by the author. And then the final element on the marble top stand beside the sofa is The Legend of the Christmas Rose. This is a retelling of a very, very old story. The earliest copy that we know of dates to the 1200s. And it tells the story of a monk who's tending the garden in his bishop's palace, and he thinks it's one of the best gardens in the land until he hears about a special flower that grows in the forest and blooms only once a year at Christmas time. So he sets out to discover this flower and finds that it's in the mountains, in the forest, and it's tended to by a band of outlaws. So the story is basically an allegory of the birth of Christ and the redemption that he brings to mankind. On the front of the book is a glass ornament of a monk depicting the monk that sets out to find the Christmas rose. So I hope that you've had an enjoyable time watching the video, and I hope that you can find the time maybe to visit in person. It's always better when you have an opportunity to see things live and talk to the docents who can fill in much more details about the things that we've talked about very briefly here. And I hope you have a Merry Christmas.